Berlin, 90 years ago. On the 10th of May 1933, German students threw tens of thousands of books into a huge bonfire. Right here, where I'm standing, in the center of Berlin.
But aren't book burnings just a dark chapter of the past? No, they are not.
In this video, we will find out why the Nazis and others burned books. And we will show how the Nazi book burnings paved the way for the killing of millions of people.
From Hitler's rise to power to the Holocaust. And finally to the destruction of Central Europe in the Second World War. It all started in a democracy, in peacetime.
Let's travel back to Germany during the 1920s.
In the golden 20s, Berlin was the third largest city in the world and maybe the most exciting cultural metropolis. The German film industry was thriving, and Erich Maria Remarque's bestseller All Quiet on the Western Front would become one of the most successful German books of the century. Women's roles were also changing. In the Weimar Republic, the first German democracy, women were allowed to vote and to choose their own professions. And some were extremely successful. Like Irmgard Keun, Else Lasker-Schüler and Vicky Baum, all famous writers in Berlin.
Female writers also were taking part in the movements of the Weimar Republic. They had the same discussions on the important issues of the time, on the idea of a new liberal society.
But there was a dark side to the Weimar Republic as well. The democratic system was not stable. People felt cheated by the peace treaty after the First World War that included high reparation payments for Germany. The Wall Street crash of 1929 likewise hit the Germans hard. In 1932, nearly 6 million Germans were unemployed. Nazis and communists were fighting in the streets of Berlin. It was a democracy, yet with a fatal lack of Democrats. All of this led to Hitler's rise to power. In January 1933, Hitler became German Chancellor.
Das deutsche Volk ist wieder stark geworden in seinem Geiste.
But the Nazi rule was also not stable. The Nazis immediately started to get rid of their enemies.
Now we are going to visit a very unique museum, the Center for Persecuted Arts in Solingen, in the west of Germany. It focuses exclusively on artists who have been victims of terror and violence. Here we are going to find out whose books have been burned and what happened to the authors. Who were the artists who are not welcome in Germany anymore?
All artists who were not in the so-called Volksgemeinschaft. So everybody who has not the Nazi opinion was not accepted from the Nazis. They declared who is in and who is out. Out were absolutely all the Jews, all the communists, all the liberals, all the social democrats, and all the people who were not common with this Nazi thinking. Authors like Ernst Toller had to flee immediately. When the Nazis came into power at the end of January 1933, he escaped in the night from his flat. He was, let's say, a liberal communist or a left-wing social democrat, and he was a Jew. And he was a personal enemy of Adolf Hitler.
In his play Wotan Unchained from 1923, Ernst Toller had ridiculed Hitler as a Pied Piper and warned of the dangers of right-wing radicals.
Because today in Germany, every citizen must think only as the Nazi leader dictates, every book not in line with Nazi doctrine The works of liberal thinkers, the writings of all Jews, are seized and burned. So thoroughly organized is Nazi domination of the individual that there is not a single German home that escapes surveillance. In every village, in every town and city are stormtroopers from whose headquarters the local party leader directs his district campaign of terror, marks victims for persecution.
This film, created for a US audience, reenacted the events that took place in Germany in the spring of 1933.
If you want to work as an artist, as an author, as a visual artist, as a musician or as an actor, you have to be member of the Reichskulturkammer.
The Nazis' Reichskulturkammer controlled all of cultural life in Nazi Germany.
The Nazis decided who is in the Reichskulturkammer and who is not in the Reichskulturkammer. If you were not in the Reichskulturkammer, you were not allowed to work officially in the Deutsches Reich as an artist.
The cultural elite of the Weimar Republic was out.
So you could not publish, you could not go into a stage on a theater, you could not work in a movie, you could not be exhibited in a museum or in a gallery or something else.
In these showcases, works and documents of blacklisted writers are displayed. In May 1933, more than 200 authors were on blacklists. And by 1934, the blacklists included more than 3,500 works. The Nazis tried to erase the memory of a whole generation of German writers.
Among them were many women who had just started to gain political equality and career opportunities. Now the tide had turned.
What was the ideal woman in the eyes of the Nazis?
A mother to many, many children. And that was it. So women had to be supportive of the men and the idea of the Reich, which was spreading German children all over a bigger Germany.
And women like Else Lasker-Schüler did not at all fit in that picture.
No, of course not.
Else Lasker-Schüler was a German Jewish poet and playwright, a leading female artist of German Expressionism, and a dazzling personality.
She was divorced twice. She had a son who was not born in one of her marriages. She really spread the ideas of liberty, of empowerment. But also she was kind of a queer artist, even though she was not a queer person, but she was performing gender.
And she was courageous. In a play, she let actors speak these prophetic lines.
They cancelled many of those programs, and they cancelled her play Arthur Euronymous. So that was in March 1933, and she had to escape because she was attacked by members of the SA in the streets in Berlin.
What happened to Else Lasker-Schüler after she had to leave Germany?
She first went to Switzerland, and then she traveled a bit, and then she came to Palestine, and in 1945 she died in Jerusalem.
Ernst Toller, Hitler's personal enemy, lived as an exile in the United States. In 1939 he was bankrupt and depressed.
He carried all the time a rope with him in his suitcase, and this was the moment when he decided, this is my last possibility to be free, to make the decision to go out of this life. And it is a disaster ending, but this is the ending of Ernst Toller, and it fits completely to his radical and consequent life.
He was one of many persecuted artists who committed suicide or were killed, like writer Karl von Ossietzky, who died in Nazi arrest, or Erich Mühsam, who was killed in a concentration camp. What was happening in Germany was no secret. On May 10, 1933, more than 100,000 people protested in US cities against Hitler. American books, by the way, were burned on this day too, like works by Upton Sinclair and Ernest Hemingway. A US national icon reacted as well, the deaf-blind writer Helen Keller. She wrote an open letter to the Nazi organizers of the book burning, saying, "History has taught you nothing if you think you can kill ideas. Tyrants have tried to do that often before, and the ideas have risen up in their might and destroyed them." Had she been born under Nazi rule, she might not even have survived childhood. The Nazis' racial hygiene program was responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of disabled persons.
Beneath this paint, bookshelves are located underground. They could hold around 20,000 books, about as many as the Nazis burned here in 1933. Today, this empty library is a memorial site, created by Israeli artist Misha Ullman.
Books are incredibly powerful. Every authoritarian regime fears them. And no story proves that better than this one.
Now, have any of you guys ever seen one of these bad things for real? We burned almost every physical book in the country. So by the time you guys grow up, there won't be one book left. Burn it.
Ray Bradbury wrote the dystopian novel in 1953, inspired by the Nazi book burnings. Mr. Tress, you're an expert on the subject of book burnings. Why did the Nazis actually burn books? They could have just banned them.
They did both. When the book burning took place here in Berlin and many other places in Germany, the book bans had already begun. The purge of libraries had begun in February and March of 1933.
What was the meaning of the fire?
Fire is traditionally a symbol that stands not only for destruction, but also, in a certain way, for rejuvenation. And the National Socialists also worked with this symbolism and this metaphor.
The orchestration of the book burnings is reminiscent of religious ceremonies, typical of Nazi events.
Übergebt alles Undeutsche dem Feuer gegen Klassenkampf und Materialismus für Volksgemeinschaft und idealistische Lebensauffassung. Ich übergebe dem Feuer die Schriften von Karl Marx und Kautsky. Wir befinden uns auf dem Opernplatz.
German radio listeners could follow the report live. The radio was one of the most important propaganda tools of the Nazi regime, and propaganda was used to both intimidate and entertain, with one goal in mind: total control of the people. What type of art and literature was permitted was decided by the so-called Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, headed by Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's closest acolyte. So Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels ordered the book burning?
No, that was done on the part of the German Student Union's initiative. Following the anti-Jewish boycott in 1933, they drew up a plan that they wanted to tie in directly with this action of the boycott of the Jews. They set up their own campaign, which was called Action Against the Un-German Spirit. That started on April 13th with the dissemination of the poster Against the Un-German Spirit, with 12 deeply anti-Semitic theses.
When I started studying here, it took about 2 or 3 weeks until I actually realized this is where books were burned, where literature, where art was burned. So that was, at first, a kind of shocking experience. We can't forget that the book burnings were not random events started by rogue Nazis. They were organized by students of our Faculty of Law, They were supported by professors of this faculty, and that part of history is not being addressed within our building.
Dylan and others want to make this more visible. They are putting together an exhibition with biographies of Nazi victims.
I think for me it was touching to see the biographies of women, because they could just start to work as a lawyer in the 1920s, 22, and just like after 10 years or something, it was over.
I can see that you all are very moved by the topic. Do you probably have any family background, like Jewish ancestors who had to leave university?
I think for me it is the other way around. So I know that at least two of my great-grandfathers were active Nazis or have been in the SS, and I think I've always felt that this had encouraged me to reflect on the Nazi era and try to remember those who have been prosecuted and who couldn't get on with their lives afterwards, just like my great-grandparents, my great-grandfathers did. So for me it was, the familiar background was a motivation to get into the topic, but just the other way around.
In the city of Cologne, in the western part of Germany, some other young people are researching Nazi victims too.
This is the headquarters of the Cologne Falcons, but not the football team Falcons. The Falcons are a German socialist youth organization with a history of more than a century. During the Nazi regime, the Falcons have been prohibited and persecuted.
Severin Schwartmann is 20 years old and belongs to a project group that is preparing a remembrance event in Cologne with songs and texts.
Our wish with this project is that we remember ourselves, our past, and the startings of our movement and organization, but also to tell a story about a fight against fascism, but also a culture of active socialist youth that was destroyed by fascism.
In addition to Jews, socialists and communists were the main enemies of the Nazis. Many of them had to flee Germany, were arrested or even killed. A musical reading in May recalls the forgotten fates of young socialists. By 1934, more than 3,500 books were on the Nazis' blacklists. Many persecuted authors had already left Germany.
Wie kann man sich das im Alltag vorstellen?
What was it like in everyday life? Did people read the blacklisted books anyway?
In the private arena, these books were still found on people's bookshelves, but of course, people were cautious when visitors came calling. They preferred to hide them away, but people continued to read them privately. In public libraries, they disappeared completely.
What would have happened if the Nazi book burnings had not occurred?
If it had not been for National Socialism, if it had not been for the burning of books, the cultural diversity and innovative spirit of Germany in the 1920s would certainly have continued. Look to the United States, to Hollywood, to the actors and directors who worked there. Fritz Lang, for example, an immigrant from Germany. Or in science, Albert Einstein, who went into exile. Or social scientists like Theodor Adorno, who also left for the United States. For American universities and American cultural institutions, the influx of immigrants from Germany was a huge benefit. They are still reaping these benefits. And I would say that we have not yet recovered from that loss and what it meant for Germany. And what took its place? Blood and soil literature, Heimat literature, and of course, National Socialist kitsch. Completely boring stuff, and people didn't actually read it.
Wo man Bücher verbrennt, verbrennt man am Ende auch Menschen. Where they burn books, they will ultimately burn human beings as well. That's what the words on this memorial plaque say. Words penned by Heinrich Heine, a German Jewish poet of the 19th century. Of course, the Nazis burned his books too.
In 1933, the Nazis burned books. In 1938, the synagogues were burned. And in 1942-43, during the Shoah, the organized genocide of the European Jews, people were burned.
The Nazis did not invent book burnings. Over the course of Christianity, both books and people were burned. In Chile, books burned after a putsch in 1973, and in 2022 in the US, books were also burned. When you hear about the book burnings in Tennessee in 2022, a pastor burned Harry Potter and Twilight volumes, or the discussions about banning books from school libraries in Florida, what do you think then?
I would not compare such individual actions with the historical context of major book burnings. On May 10th alone, books were burned in 22 places in Germany. These actions of which you speak, there was also a burning of the Quran in Sweden by right-wing extremists, which of course should be condemned. These are actions by individuals or groups, but they are not actions backed by public authorities or police agencies.
Do you think something like that could happen in Germany too?
When we are not fighting for our, let's say, our values, of course, it could happen on every place of the earth. When intolerant and non-democratic radicals came into power, this is clear, it could happen on every place of the earth, also in Germany.
What can each and every one of us do to prevent that?
Stay alert and say something. Have the courage to say something.
So what do you think about book burning or about book banning? What could we learn from German history? Thanks for watching and please leave us your comments.